The sound echoed through the courthouse lobby like a gunshot, the sharp click of metal handcuffs snapping shut around Marcus Williams' wrists. Tourists froze mid-conversation, lawyers stopped checking their phones, and court reporters paused their hurried steps to stare. Marcus didn't resist, didn't struggle, didn't raise his voice. He simply stood there in his perfectly pressed charcoal suit, his silk tie still perfectly knotted, as Officer Mitchell roughly turned him around. "You think you can just walk in here like you own the place?" Mitchell hissed into his ear, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "The only mistake was you thinking you belong here." Marcus Williams looked over his shoulder, meeting Mitchell's eyes with a calm that seemed to unsettle the officer. "Officer Mitchell," he said quietly, reading the name tag, "you're making a serious mistake." Mitchell laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the marble walls. "The mistake is yours, buddy. Coming to the wrong place at the wrong time." But as Marcus was led away past the bronze scales of justice statue, his briefcase left behind on the security table, neither Mitchell nor the watching crowd could have imagined that in exactly those same scales would tip in a direction that would leave Mitchell questioning everything he thought he knew about justice. It had started as a routine Tuesday morning at the Wayne County Courthouse. Marcus Williams arrived at 8:30 a.m., 45 minutes before his scheduled hearing in courtroom 3A. He had been the senior prosecutor for the Attorney General's office for 12 years, specializing in police misconduct cases. This morning he was set to deliver closing arguments in a case involving 3 Detroit officers accused of excessive force during a traffic stop. The irony wasn't lost on him as he climbed the courthouse steps. Officer Brad Mitchell had been working courthouse security for 8 years. At 34, he was known among his colleagues for his aggressive approach to what he called suspicious individuals. His partner, Officer Sarah Davis, often found herself uncomfortable with Mitchell's methods, but she rarely spoke up. This morning would be different. Marcus approached the metal detector with the same quiet confidence he brought to every courtroom. His Italian leather briefcase contained his closing argument notes, case files, and witness statements that would likely send 3 officers to prison. He placed his watch and phone in the plastic tray, his movements precise and professional. "Hold on there," Mitchell called out, stepping away from his post. Something about Marcus's demeanor bothered him. The expensive suit, the confident walk, the way he seemed to belong in this place of justice. "I need to see some identification." Marcus reached for his wallet calmly. "Of course, officer." He handed over his state prosecutor credentials, the same ID he'd shown dozens of times in this very building. Mitchell examined the wallet with exaggerated suspicion, turning it over in his hands multiple times. "This looks fake to me," he announced loudly. "State of Michigan, Office of the Attorney General, Marcus J. Williams, Senior Prosecutor." He looked up with a smirk. "Right. And I'm the governor." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the lobby. Davis stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "Brad, maybe we should just run it through the system." "No need," Mitchell cut her off. "I've seen enough fake IDs to know one when I see it." He handed the wallet back to Marcus. "You're going to need to come with me, sir. We have some questions." Marcus remained calm, though a familiar weight settled in his chest. He'd prosecuted cases like this before, stood beside victims who'd experienced this exact scenario. "Officer Mitchell, I'm a prosecutor with the state. I have a hearing in courtroom 3A in 30 minutes. I suggest you verify my credentials through proper channels. I suggest you stop trying to tell me how to do my job." Mitchell shot back, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "You're acting suspicious, carrying fake identification, and now you're being uncooperative." The lobby was filling with onlookers. A young law student pulled out her phone and began recording. Several attorneys recognized Marcus, but were too far away to intervene immediately. An elderly bailiff who had worked the building for 20 years started walking over, recognizing the prosecutor he'd seen hundreds of times. "Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back," Mitchell ordered. Marcus looked around the lobby one more time, his eyes taking in the faces of the people watching. Some showed shock, others discomfort. A few nodded with approval at what they assumed was proper law enforcement. "Officer Mitchell," Marcus said quietly, "I'm asking you one more time to verify my credentials before you make a mistake that will affect both of our careers." The only mistake here is you thinking you can walk into my courthouse with fake ID and attitude, Mitchell responded, grabbing Marcus's arm. The handcuffs clicked shut with that distinctive metallic sound that seemed to echo through the marble space. Marcus didn't resist. He had learned long ago, both as a prosecutor and as a black man in America, that resistance in moments like this only made things worse. The system would have to correct itself. As Mitchell led him toward the security office, Marcus caught sight of his briefcase sitting abandoned on the X-ray conveyor belt. Inside those files were the closing arguments that would conclude months of investigation into police misconduct. The irony was almost too perfect. You think you can just walk in here like you own the place? Mitchell hissed as they walked, his grip tight on Marcus's arm. The only mistake was you thinking you belong here. Marcus turned his head slightly, meeting Mitchell's eyes with a steady gaze. Officer Mitchell, you're making a serious mistake. Mitchell's laugh was harsh and carried across the lobby. The mistake is yours, buddy. Coming to the wrong place. At the wrong time. But as they passed the bronze scales of justice statue that had stood in the courthouse lobby for over 50 years, Marcus Williams knew something that Mitchell didn't. Justice has a way of correcting itself, sometimes in ways that are swift and certain. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., those scales would tip in a direction that would teach Officer Mitchell a lesson about assumptions, authority, and the dangerous cost of prejudice. The security office was a small, windowless room behind the main lobby. Mitchell pushed Marcus into a plastic chair and began filling out an incident report. Davis stood in the doorway, shifting uncomfortably. What exactly am I being charged with? Marcus asked, his voice disorderly conduct, fake identifications, suspicious behavior. Mitchell rattled off without looking up from his paperwork. And if you keep running your mouth, we can add obstruction. Marcus sat silently for a moment, then spoke with the measured tone he used in courtrooms. Officer Mitchell, I want you to call the Attorney General's office. Ask for Director Patricia Coleman. Tell her that Senior Prosecutor Marcus Williams is being detained at the Wayne County Courthouse. Mitchell looked up from his report. You don't give orders here, Pat. You're not in charge of anything. I'm not giving orders, Marcus replied calmly. I'm offering you a way to avoid what's about to become a very public mistake. Davis finally stepped forward. Brad, maybe we should just make the call. It would only take a minute to verify. Davis, whose side are you on? Mitchell snapped. This guy comes in here with fake credentials, tries to intimidate us with some fancy story. And you want to play along? Marcus watched the interaction with the same analytical eye he brought to examining witness testimony. Mitchell was committed to his course of action, driven by something deeper than just following protocol. This was about power, about who belonged where, about maintaining an order that placed people like Marcus Williams firmly outside the circles of real authority. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. Marcus's hearing in courtroom 3A had already begun without him. His assistant prosecutor, Jennifer Chang, would be wondering where he was, possibly requesting a continuance. The three officers whose fate hung in the balance of his closing argument would get an unexpected reprieve. At 10:15 a.m., the security office door burst open. Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who worked closely with the prosecutor's office, stood in the doorway with fire in her eyes. What the hell is going on here? She demanded, looking at Marcus in handcuffs and then at Mitchell. Do you have any idea who you've arrested? Mitchell stood up, puffing out his chest. I arrested someone carrying fake identification and acting suspicious. And unless you want to join him, I suggest you back off. Rodriguez pulled out her phone and showed Mitchell the screen. It displayed the Attorney General's website with a photo of Marcus Williams and his official biography. This is Senior Prosecutor Marcus Williams. He's been working in this building for 12 years. He's prosecuted more police misconduct cases than anyone in the state. The color drained from Mitchell's face, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Anyone can fake a website. That proves nothing. Rodriguez shook her head in disbelief. Davis, you know better than this. Get those cuffs off him right now. Davis looked between Rodriguez and Mitchell, her training warring with her loyalty to her partner. Brad, I think we don't need to do anything, Mitchell interrupted. I'm in charge of security for this building, and I make the decisions about who gets detained and why." Marcus spoke for the first time in an hour. "Officer Mitchell, in about 15 minutes, Attorney General Coleman is going to call this building looking for me. When she does, you're going to have to explain why you arrested one of her senior prosecutors without cause, why you ignored multiple opportunities to verify my identity, and why you're keeping me handcuffed in this room instead of allowing me to do my job." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "You don't scare me with your threats." "They're not threats," Marcus replied quietly. "They're predictions." At 10:32 a.m., the desk phone in the security office rang. Davis answered. "Wayne County Courthouse Security. Officer Davis speaking." Her face went pale as she listened. "Yes, ma'am. Yes, he's here. Yes, ma'am. I understand." She hung up and looked at Mitchell. "That was Director Coleman from the Attorney General's office. She wants to speak with whoever is in charge of detaining Prosecutor Williams." Mitchell grabbed the phone when it rang again. "This is Officer Mitchell, head of courthouse security." His voice was confident, but sweat had begun to form on his forehead. As he listened, his expression changed from confidence to confusion to something approaching panic. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. Yes, ma'am. Right away." He hung up the phone and stared at Marcus for a long moment. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of the courthouse conducting its daily business. "Uncuff him," Mitchell said quietly to Davis. "What?" Davis asked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "I said uncuff him. Now." As the handcuffs came off, Marcus rubbed his wrists and stood up slowly. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and picked up his wallet from Mitchell's desk. His dignity, which had never really left him, seemed to fill the small room. "Officer Mitchell," Marcus said, his voice still calm but carrying new weight. "I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be absolutely certain you were right, only to discover you were completely wrong. Remember it, because tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you're going to experience that feeling again." Mitchell looked confused. "What do you mean?" Marcus adjusted his cufflinks and headed for the door. "You'll find out soon." As Marcus left the security office to retrieve his briefcase and finally make his way to courtroom 3A, Mitchell sank into his chair. Davis watched him with a mixture of concern and disappointment. "Brad," she said quietly, "do you realize what just happened?" Mitchell didn't answer. He was staring at the incident report he'd been filling out, the one that now seemed like evidence of his own failure rather than documentation of a job well done. The courthouse lobby had returned to its normal rhythm by the time Marcus emerged from the security office. A few people glanced his way, but most were absorbed in their own legal dramas. The law student who had recorded the arrest approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "I'm Sarah Chen, a student at Wayne Law. I recorded what happened earlier. I wanted you to know that I have it if you need it." Marcus looked at the young woman, seeing in her face the future of the legal profession. "Thank you, Sarah. That was very thoughtful of you. Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What do you think you learned from watching what happened here today?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I learned that justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms. It's about how we treat each other every day, especially when we think no one important is watching." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown all morning. "That's exactly right. Remember that when you become a lawyer." By the time Marcus reached courtroom 3A, the morning session was in recess. Judge Patricia Harrison, a colleague and friend for over a decade, approached him with concern in her eyes. "Marcus, where have you been? Jennifer said you never showed up for opening arguments." Marcus straightened his jacket one more time. "I was detained, Your Honor. Illegally, as it turns out." Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Detained? By whom?" "Courthouse security." Officer Mitchell felt my identification was suspicious. The judge's face darkened. "Are you telling me that courthouse security arrested a sitting prosecutor in my building?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Marcus replied. "And, Your Honor, I have a feeling this case just became a lot more interesting." Judge Harrison shook her head in disbelief. "We'll discuss this after you finish your closing arguments. Right now, I want you to go in there and do what you do best." Marcus nodded and walked into the courtroom where the three Detroit officers sat at the defendant's table with their lawyers. They looked confident, almost smug. After all, the prosecutor had missed the morning session. Maybe this case wasn't as strong as they'd feared. They had no idea that their prosecutor had just experienced firsthand exactly the kind of treatment their victims had described in their testimony. Marcus Williams was about to deliver a closing argument informed not just by legal expertise and evidence, but by the fresh sting of injustice that was still burning in his chest. That evening, Marcus sat in his downtown Detroit office, reviewing the events of the day. His closing argument had been particularly powerful, delivered with a passion that surprised even him. The jury would deliberate tomorrow, but he felt confident about the outcome. His assistant, Jennifer Chang, knocked on his door. "Marcus, there's something you should see." She handed him a tablet showing a news website. The headline read, "Prosecutor arrested at courthouse while heading to police misconduct trial." The story included the video taken by law student Sarah Chen, as well as interviews with witnesses who had been in the lobby. The footage was clear and damaging. A well-dressed black man being handcuffed and led away while asking calmly for his credentials to be verified. "It's already gone viral," Jennifer said. "Over 1 million views in 6 hours." Marcus set down the tablet and leaned back in his chair. "Tomorrow is going to be very interesting." "What do you mean?" Marcus looked out his office window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the darkness. Officer Mitchell is about to learn that actions have consequences, and those consequences are often delivered by the very system he thought he was protecting. The next morning at 8:45 a.m., Officer Brad Mitchell sat in the defendant's chair in courtroom 2B. Beside him sat a court-appointed attorney who had been assigned to his case just 2 hours earlier. Across from him, at the prosecutor's table, sat a familiar figure in a familiar charcoal suit. Marcus Williams opened his file and looked up at Mitchell with the same calm expression he had worn the day before. "Good morning, Officer Mitchell." Mitchell's mouth was dry. His hands were shaking slightly. Beside him, his attorney leaned over and whispered, "We should consider a plea agreement." "Your Honor," Marcus began, addressing Judge Elizabeth Morrison, "the state is prepared to proceed in the case of People v. Mitchell, charging the defendant with false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under color of authority, and official misconduct." Judge Morrison nodded. "Proceed, Counselor." Marcus stood and walked to the center of the courtroom, the same courtroom where he had argued hundreds of cases over his career. But today felt different. Today he wasn't just representing the people of Michigan. He was representing every person who had ever been judged by their appearance, rather than their actions. Every individual who had been denied basic respect because someone in uniform decided they didn't belong. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of experience and recent personal knowledge, "yesterday morning Officer Brad Mitchell made a decision. He decided that a well-dressed black man entering the courthouse where he worked every day for 12 years was suspicious. He decided that valid identification issued by the state of Michigan was fake. He decided that his assumptions were more reliable than established verification procedure." As Marcus spoke, he could see Mitchell shifting uncomfortably in his chair. The officer's attorney was taking notes rapidly, probably already planning an appeal strategy. "But this case isn't just about Officer Mitchell's poor judgment," Marcus continued. "It's about a system that allows personal bias to override professional training. It's about what happens when someone entrusted with upholding the law decides that the law doesn't apply equally to everyone." The courtroom was silent except for the occasional shuffle of papers and the soft humming of the air conditioning system. In the gallery, several reporters sat with notepads ready. The story had already made national news. Marcus walked over to the evidence table and picked up a photograph. "This is a picture of Officer Mitchell handcuffing me in the courthouse lobby yesterday morning. You can see my briefcase sitting on the security conveyor belt. Inside that briefcase were the closing arguments for a police misconduct case I was prosecuting in this very building." He paused, letting the irony sink in. Officer Mitchell didn't just arrest an innocent man yesterday. He arrested a prosecutor who was on his way to argue that police officers who abuse their authority should be held accountable. The symbolism would be poetic if the consequences weren't so serious. Marcus spent the next hour methodically presenting evidence: the security video, witness testimony, Mitchell's own incident report that contained multiple factual errors. He played the audio of Attorney General Coleman's phone call to the security office, in which she clearly identified Marcus as one of her senior prosecutors. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus called Detective Lisa Rodriguez to testify. "Detective Rodriguez," Marcus asked, "how long have you known me professionally?" 8 years, Rodriguez replied. "We've worked together on dozens of cases. And in those 8 years, how many times would you estimate you've seen me in the Wayne County Courthouse?" "Hundreds of times. You're there almost every week." Marcus turned to look at Mitchell. "Detective, are you familiar with Officer Mitchell?" "Yes. I've seen him working security for several years." "In your professional opinion, should Officer Mitchell have recognized me?" Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Absolute. Any officer who works courthouse security should know the prosecutors who appear there regularly. It's basic job knowledge." When it was the defense attorney's turn, he tried to argue that Mitchell had been following proper security protocols, that anyone could make a mistake under pressure, that the prosecution was being vindictive by pursuing charges. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Bradley Mitchell, guilty on all charges." Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for the following month, but the real consequence had already been delivered. Mitchell's career in law enforcement was over. His pension was forfeit. His reputation was destroyed. As the courtroom emptied, Mitchell approached Marcus at the prosecutor's table. Mitchell began, then stopped. "I want you to know that I didn't mean for it to happen like this." Marcus looked up from his files. "Officer Mitchell, the problem isn't that you meant for it to happen. The problem is that you never considered that it shouldn't happen at all." Mitchell nodded slowly and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. That evening, Marcus Williams stood once again in his office, looking out at the city lights. But tonight felt different. The scales of justice had tipped, not through anger or revenge, but through the steady application of law and evidence. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Chen, the law student who had recorded the arrest. "Mr. Williams, I wanted you to know that your case inspired me to focus my studies on civil rights law. Thank you for showing me what real justice looks like." Marcus smiled and typed back, "Justice isn't something we achieve once and then forget about. It's something we have to choose every day, in every interaction, in every decision. Thank you for choosing to pay attention when it matters." 3 months later, the Wayne County Courthouse implemented new security protocols. All officers working courthouse security were required to receive annual training on recognizing court personnel and proper identification verification procedures. A photograph directory of all prosecutors, judges, and regular court personnel was installed at every security station. Officer Sarah Davis, who had witnessed the entire incident, was promoted to head of courthouse security. Her first official act was to require all security personnel to attend a seminar on implicit bias and procedural justice. The 3 Detroit officers in Marcus's original case were convicted and sentenced to prison terms. The families of their victims finally felt that justice had been served, and Marcus Williams continued to prosecute cases, but with a new understanding of how the system looked from the other side. He had always been good at his job, but now he was great at it, because he carried with him the fresh memory of what it felt like to be powerless in the face of bias and assumption. Sometimes justice is swift and dramatic, delivered in moments of revelation that change everything at once. But more often, justice is slow and methodical, built case by case, decision by decision, choice by choice. Officer Mitchell learned that authority without accountability is just another form of injustice. Marcus Williams proved that dignity maintained under pressure becomes strength, and strength applied with wisdom becomes change. The courthouse lobby still echoes with conversations, footsteps, and the daily business of justice. But now it also carries the memory of a moment when the system corrected itself, when assumptions met reality, and when the scales finally balanced. True justice doesn't require perfect people or perfect institutions. It requires people willing to admit when they're wrong, systems strong enough to correct themselves, and individuals brave enough to stand firm when everything around them suggests they should simply accept unfairness as normal. Marcus Williams walked into that courthouse as a prosecutor. He walked out as something more, a reminder that justice belongs to everyone, and that sometimes the most important cases are the ones where we get to be both the victim and the advocate, both the witness and the judge. The bronze scales still stand in the lobby, a symbol of justice that remains constant, even as the people who serve it continue to learn, grow, and change.